On Christmas Eve 1971, Juliane Koepcke, a 17-year-old German girl, boarded Lanza Flight 508 flying from Lima, Peru to Pucallpa with her mother Maria. Pucallpa was a city in the Amazonian lowlands where the pair planned to spend Christmas with Juliane's father, Hans Wilhelm Koepcke. Hans, a zoologist, was stationed at a research facility in the Amazon rainforest, where he and Maria, an ornithologist, had been conducting ecological studies. The family was excited to reunite and celebrate the holiday together after Maria and Juliane had finished their commitments in Lima. What began as a seemingly ordinary trip transformed into a nightmare of unparalleled proportions. The Amazon, often romanticized for its lush greenery and vibrant wildlife, became the stage for one of the most harrowing survival stories in history. While flying high above the Amazon, the plane was struck by a bolt of lightning during a violent thunderstorm. The strike ignited chaos as turbulence battered the aircraft, luggage flew through the cabin, and passengers screamed in terror. In a matter of seconds, the calm flight erupted as the plane began to break apart midair. Juliane, still strapped to her seat, was violently sucked out of the airplane cabin and plummeted roughly 2 miles from the sky as the wreckage of the airplane accompanied her on their descent to the surface. At some point after the strike, she blacked out, succumbing to the darkness of her unconscious mind. Against all odds, she would open her eyes sometime later. Likely cushioned by the dense canopy of the rainforest below, she survived the plane crash from 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet in the air. When she awoke, she found herself alone in a hostile, alien world, the screams and chaos of the crash replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by the calls of unseen creatures. By this point, Juliane would have already experienced one of the most incredible survival stories ever told, but unfortunately for her, the ordeal had only just begun. She had suffered a concussion, a broken collarbone, and deep gashes on her legs and arms. Her body ached with every movement, yet survival instincts propelled her forward. In a depressing, surely horrific moment, Juliane called out into the rainforest repeatedly for her mother, receiving no response. She wandered near the crash site and stumbled upon the wreckage, finding no signs of life among the bodies scattered like macabre ornaments in the jungle. While beautiful from the skies above, beneath its canopy, the Amazon rainforest is a realm of intense peril, teeming with predators, venomous creatures, and an unforgiving environment where every step could mean the difference between life and death. Her right collarbone was broken, a deep gash ran along her left calf, and her right eye was swollen shut. Insects swarmed around her, and her body was battered from the impact of the crash. Juliane's knowledge of the Amazon, acquired during her upbringing as the daughter of scientists stationed in the rainforest, became her greatest ally. She knew that finding water was her most immediate priority. The humid environment and sweltering heat would quickly dehydrate her if she didn't act. She recalled that streams often lead to rivers, and rivers could lead to civilization. This principle became her guiding focus as she began to navigate the jungle. Among the debris scattered across the rainforest floor, she came across the bodies of fellow passengers, some still strapped to their seats. She avoided examining them too closely, overwhelmed by the horror of what she might recognize. She scavenged what she could from the wreckage, finding a small bag of candy that would become her only food source for the next 10 days. Swarms of mosquitoes and tiny flies relentlessly attacked her exposed skin, leaving her body covered in welts. Her wounds, already festering in the humid environment, became breeding grounds for infection. The approximate location of the plane crash was here, near the confluence of the Pachitea River and Yoyapichis River in the Puerto Inca district of Peru. As you can see, even after surviving a plane crash, she again seemed faced with another completely impossible survival scenario. After wandering aimlessly for the entire first day, she was lucky enough to find a small stream. This stream provided not only water to drink, but also a natural path to follow, again, hopefully to civilization. For days, she walked alongside it, often wading through the water to avoid the dense underbrush. The stream's coolness was a small relief from the oppressive heat, which could reach up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, with intense humidity. But the water obviously came with its own dangers. Juliane had to stay alert for predators like caimans lurking silently beneath the surface, and piranhas, which could be lethal if provoked. As the days wore on, her physical condition deteriorated rapidly. The wound on her calf had worsened and had become infested with maggots, causing her excruciating pain. She managed to keep moving by focusing on her father's advice about the jungle. Juliane had no tools for hunting or preparing food, so she survived on the bare minimum. Apart from the candy she had salvaged, she occasionally nibbled on fruits she recognized as safe from her time in the Amazon with her parents. Starvation loomed as a constant threat, and the mental toll of solitude compounded the physical hardships she was enduring. In a situation like this, injured, alone, without knowing where you're located, with the knowledge that you are completely lost within the largest, most dangerous, most complex rainforest in the world, you must know how slim your chances of survival are. That kind of psychological burden, knowing that she was essentially certain to die out there, and that nobody would ever even know that she survived the crash, or even find her body for a proper burial, it's impossible to imagine the horrors that must have gone through her mind. Each night, the rainforest transformed into a cacophony of sounds. The cries of unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of monkeys made the darkness suffocating. With no shelter, Juliane lay on the damp ground, vulnerable to the elements and the nocturnal predators that prowled the jungle. Her broken body barely allowed for rest, with sleep coming intermittently, if at all. On the 10th day, Juliane stumbled upon a logger's encampment by the river. The sight of human tools and a crude shelter must have felt surreal after days of isolation. However, upon entering, she found that the camp had been deserted, and Juliane was still on her own. Inside, she found a small boat and a can of gasoline. By this point, the maggots in her wounds had become unbearable. Drawing on knowledge from her father, she poured the gasoline over the infected area. The process was agonizing, but it worked, with the maggots beginning to wiggle out of her flesh. This act of self-treatment likely saved her from a fatal infection. Her ordeal finally came to an end when, amazingly, the loggers returned to their camp. Shocked to find the emaciated teenager alive, they cared for her as best as they could, giving her food and tending to her wounds. They transported her via canoe to a nearby village, where she was airlifted to safety. The news of her survival spread quickly, and it became obvious that Juliane was the sole survivor of Lanza Flight 508. Disturbingly, upon investigation of the crash site, it was revealed that her mother, along with as many as 14 other passengers, had in fact survived the crash, but ultimately succumbed to their injuries and died in the jungle. Her seat was attached to 2 seats to her left as a part of a row of 3. It's possible that this row of seats, which was still attached during the descent, was able to cause enough drag to sort of act as a parachute, slowing down her fall. The thick foliage at the crash site was also a likely contributor to her survival. On the night of January 10th, 1992, a tragic and brutal crime unfolded in Madison, Indiana. The victim was 12-year-old Shanda Sharer, a girl who had recently moved to Indiana from Kentucky with her mother following a divorce. Shanda, to those who knew her, was a bright, bubbly child who enjoyed school and made friends easily. However, her life took a dark turn when she became the target of jealousy and rage from a group of older girls. Shanda had developed a close friendship with 14-year-old Amanda Heverin, which, according to those close to the girls, had reportedly evolved into a romantic relationship. This new bond sparked intense jealousy in Melinda Loveless, a 16-year-old girl who had previously dated Heverin for over a year. Melinda felt betrayed by Heverin's new relationship with Sharer and began making threats against her. At one point, Melinda openly stated that she wanted to kill Sharer, alarming both peers and adults around them. In an attempt to protect her daughter, Shanda's mother transferred her to another school, hoping to distance her from the escalating tensions. Despite these efforts, the animosity did not subside. Things came to a head on the night of January 10th, 1992, when three girls, Lori Tackett, 17, Hope Rippey, 15, and Toni Lawrence, also 15, all drove to Melinda Loveless's house. There, Melinda showed them a knife and apparently told them that she was going to try and scare Shanda with it, accusing the 12-year-old of stealing her girlfriend. They devised a plan to lure Shanda out of her home under the pretense of taking her to meet with Amanda. Initially, they arrived at Shanda's house, but were unable to convince her to leave with them. After some time, the group returned once her parents were asleep. Under the guise of friendship, this time they were able to convince Shanda to join them in Tackett's car, claiming that, again, they were going to see Amanda. Unbeknownst to Shanda, Loveless was hiding under a blanket in the back seat with a knife. As they drove toward an isolated location known as the Witch's Castle, an abandoned house that served as a local hangout for teenagers, Loveless's intentions became horrifyingly clear. Before we dive into the horrific events to follow that night, we need to establish some background on who these girls were. Melinda's emotional trauma stemmed from her deeply dysfunctional family. She was the youngest of three daughters in a household marked by severe instability and abuse. Her father, Larry Loveless, a Vietnam War veteran, exhibited violent and erratic behavior, subjecting his wife and daughters to emotional and sexual abuse. This toxic atmosphere created profound fear and confusion for Melinda, who experienced her father's disturbing actions firsthand. Following her parents' divorce when Melinda was 14, she faced feelings of abandonment and betrayal, particularly as her father's departure left a void in her life. This emotional turmoil manifested in increasingly erratic behavior during her teenage years. Her jealousy over her girlfriend Amanda Heverin's friendship with Shanda Sharer reflected unresolved issues from her tumultuous upbringing and a lack of healthy relationships. Ultimately, Melinda's hatred towards Shanda was not merely impulsive jealousy, but was rather a manifestation of deep-seated emotional distress shaped by years of trauma. Lori Tackett, aged 17 at the time, would end up being another key figure in the event that was soon to follow. She was aware of Loveless's violent intentions and participated actively in the abduction. Hope Rippey and Toni Lawrence, both 15 years old, were also part of the group. These two initially didn't even know Loveless, but were drawn into the plan by their friend Tackett. While they were frightened during the ordeal, both girls ultimately participated in the events to follow. With all of that being said, we go back to the night of January 20th. Once at the Witch's Castle, the girls subjected Shanda to hours of torture. Loveless repeatedly punched Sharer in the face and slammed her head into her knee, causing severe injuries. She taunted her, telling her she had pretty hair and questioning whether she would still be pretty if she were to cut it off. The other two girls initially stayed in the car while all of this was going on, but eventually joined in, holding down their victim as Loveless held a knife to Sharer's throat. When that failed, they resorted to stabbing her multiple times in the chest and strangling her with rope until she lost consciousness. At some point, Rippey took Sharer's Mickey Mouse watch and danced to the tune it played. Tackett further taunted Sharer, claiming that the witch's castle was filled with human remains, and that Sharer's would be next. After she lost consciousness, they believed that they had succeeded in killing the young girl. They placed her unconscious body in the trunk of Tackett's car and drove away. They eventually made it to Tackett's house, where they stopped for a short time to clean up and discuss their actions over sodas, as if they meant nothing. Shortly into their arrival, the girls heard screaming and banging coming from the trunk. Sharer was still alive. Upon making this realization, Tackett exited the home with a paring knife, which she used to repeatedly stab Shanda several times. She returned back to the rest of the girls, covered in blood. The girls laughed about their actions as if they were playing some sort of game. Eventually, both Loveless and Tackett decided to go country cruising with Shanda still in the trunk. They drove around rural Indiana for hours while continuing to beat Sharer with various objects, including a tire iron. During this time, Shanda still barely clung to life, though she was so severely injured that she was completely helpless to defend herself. The two girls then returned back to Tackett's house before sunrise to wash up and wake up the other two girls who had fallen asleep. When Rippy asked about Sharer, Tackett apparently burst out into laughter, going into detail about what they had done to the 12-year-old. Upon opening the trunk to show the other two the condition she was in, Rippy sprayed Sharer with a bottle of Windex and said, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" In the early morning hours of January 11th, they made their way to a gas station where they filled a soda bottle with gasoline. They then drove north of Madison, Indiana to an isolated area off Lemon Road. There, they dragged Shanda from the trunk, who was still alive but barely conscious, and wrapped her in a blanket before dousing her with gasoline. They then set Shanda on fire. She writhed in agony as the girls poured more gasoline on her body, which was still ablaze. After confirming their gruesome work was complete, they left the scene. They then went to a McDonald's around 9:30 in the morning to grab breakfast. There, they apparently laughed about how her body looked like the burned sausages they were eating. Shortly later, Tackett drove Lawrence and Rippy back to their houses before she returned to her own home with Loveless. There, they called Heverin and informed her that they had killed Sharer. They then arranged to pick up Heverin later that day with Tackett. After they got together, Loveless told Heverin the story, but she refused to accept what they were telling her. It was only when Tackett took them around to the trunk of the car, revealing Sharer's bloody handprints and socks, that Heverin realized that what they were saying was the truth. In disbelief, she immediately asked to be taken home. As she was being dropped back off, Loveless gave Heverin a kiss, told her that she loved her, and made her promise not to tell anyone about what they had done. Still, it didn't take long at all for the truth to come to the surface. Into the morning of January 11th, two hunters discovered her charred remains in the field near Madison. Though she was initially unrecognizable due to the severe burns and trauma, investigators were able to swiftly identify Shanda through dental records after receiving reports of a missing girl from her father. The police investigation quickly led them to the four girls involved in the horrific crime after Lawrence and Rippy approached law enforcement later that day with information about what had transpired. Their confessions detailed not only the abduction, but also the extensive torture inflicted upon Sharer over several hours. The authorities had arrested all four girls by January 12th, with each facing charges including murder and criminal confinement. The case drew significant media attention due to its shocking nature and the ages of those involved. Teenagers committing such extreme violence against another child was almost unfathomable for many at the time. All four girls were charged as adults despite their young ages. However, prosecutors sought plea bargains rather than pursuing death sentences due to their youth. Melinda Loveless was identified as the ringleader behind the crimes, receiving a 60-year sentence along with Lori Tackett, who played an equally significant role in the torture and murder of 12-year-old Sharer. Hope Rippey received 35 but was released after serving only 14 due to good behavior, while Tony Lawrence received a 20-year sentence but was released after just 9 years. Shanda's parents were obviously devastated by their loss, while community members struggled with feelings of fear over how such violence could erupt among teenagers so easily. The case also ignited discussions about mental health issues that could lead young people down dark paths fueled by rage or jealousy. Due to a mix of changes in the legal framework around juvenile sentencing as well as their behavior while incarcerated, Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett were each also recently released from prison. Melinda Loveless was released on September 5, 2019, after serving 26 years of her 60-year sentence. Similarly, Lori Tackett was also released on January 11, 2018, exactly 26 years following the murder. Patricia Hearst, born on February 20th, 1954, into the prominent Hearst family, was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, a powerful media mogul who significantly shaped American journalism and politics. Raised in Hillsborough, California, Patty enjoyed a privileged upbringing, attending elite schools and eventually studying art history at the University of California, Berkeley. Her grandfather, William Randolph Hearst, was a formidable figure in American media and politics, known for establishing one of the largest newspaper empires in the country. By the 1930s, he controlled 28 newspapers, a movie studio, radio stations, and numerous magazines, making him a significant force in shaping public opinion. In addition to his media influence, Hearst also ventured into politics, running for various offices including Congress, and even seeking the Democratic presidential nomination in 1904. The family also used their influence in politics to oppose organized labor, the interests of gold mine workers, as well as communism. Despite the family's history, Patricia's life was typical for a young woman in her social class. However, this all changed on the 4th of February, 1974, when her life was dramatically interrupted. She was taken from her apartment in Berkeley, California, by an armed group of radicals calling themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA. The abduction unfolded when a group of armed men and women, including a woman posing as a delivery person, forcibly entered her home. They beat her fiancé, Stephen Weed, and dragged Patty out, blindfolded and screaming, before stowing her in the trunk of their car. The SLA targeted Hearst specifically because of her family's wealth and influence, believing that kidnapping her would garner significant media attention and further their revolutionary agenda aimed at dismantling the capitalist system. The SLA was a small, militant left-wing organization led by Donald DeFreeze, who stylized himself as General Field Marshal Sink. Their ideology was a mix of Marxist and anti-capitalist rhetoric, and they sought to ignite a revolution against what they viewed as systemic oppression in America. The SLA had already garnered some infamy for the assassination of Marcus Foster, Oakland's first black superintendent of schools, who they accused of collaborating with police. Their kidnapping of Hearst marked a new and dramatic escalation in their activities. Following Hearst's abduction, the SLA released several audio recordings to the press.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I'm not being starved or beaten or unnecessarily frightened. I also know that the SLA members here are very upset about press distortions of what's been happening. I'm kept blindfolded, usually, so that I can't identify anyone. My hands are often tied, but they're not. And I think you can tell that I'm not really terrified or anything. I'm okay. There's no way that I will be released until they let me go. So it wouldn't do any good for somebody to come in here and try to get me out by force. I want to get out of here, but the only way I'm going to is if we do it their way. Do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly.
In their first communication, they demanded the release of two of their imprisoned members, Russ Little and Joe Ramiro, who had been arrested for the murder of Marcus Foster. When this was deemed impossible, they issued a second demand, that Hearst's family distribute $70 worth of food to every Californian in need, which would have cost the family some $400 million. This, again, was quite a ridiculous demand, so instead, Hearst's father took out a $2 million loan and created a project called People in Need, where they began donating food to the impoverished of the Bay Area. However, when thousands of people began chaotically fighting for supplies, the SLA deemed the effort insufficient and refused to release Patty. In captivity, Patty was reportedly confined in a small, dark closet and subjected to physical and psychological abuse. She was isolated for weeks, blindfolded and tied up, while her captors bombarded her with their ideology. According to Hearst's later testimony, she was assaulted and repeatedly threatened with death. The SLA sought to reprogram her into an active participant in their cause, employing methods that experts later likened to brainwashing. On April 3, 1974, the SLA released a recording in which Patty announced that she had joined their ranks. Adopting the name Tanya after a historical revolutionary figure, she declared her allegiance to the SLA and denounced her family and former life. Even more shockingly, shortly thereafter, surveillance footage was revealed to the public, capturing Patty wielding a firearm during the SLA's armed robbery of the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco. The robbery, which netted over $10,000, showed Patty in a beret and holding a semi-automatic weapon, appearing to shout orders alongside her captors. The footage sparked widespread debate over whether Hearst was a victim of coercion or a willing participant. While her lawyers and some psychologists argued she was suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, where captives develop sympathy or loyalty towards their captors, others believed she had genuinely embraced the SLA's revolutionary ideology. Public statements released to the press by the SLA further complicated matters. In these audio recordings, she appeared to passionately defend the SLA and justify their actions. Over the next several months, Hearst continued to engage in SLA operations. In May 1974, she drove a getaway car during a botched robbery of a sporting goods store in Los Angeles, during which SLA member Emily Harris accidentally killed store owner Myrna Opsahl. Patty later claimed she participated only out of fear for her life, but witnesses reported that she seemed calm and in control during the incident. The SLA's violent actions and increasing notoriety led to an intense FBI manhunt. On May 17, 1974, a major breakthrough occurred when police located several SLA members in a house in Los Angeles. A massive shootout ensued, followed by a fire that engulfed the building. 6 members, including Donald DeFries, died in the standoff. Hearst and a few others were not present at the scene and remained fugitives. After the shootout, the remaining SLA members went underground, moving frequently and relying on criminal activities to survive. For over a year, Patty lived as a fugitive, participating in smaller-scale operations and adopting disguises to avoid detection. During this period, her case became a media sensation, with her face plastered across newspapers and debates about her culpability dominating public discourse. On September 18, 1975, the FBI finally captured Hearst in San Francisco, along with 2 SLA members, Wendy Yoshimura and Bill Harris. When arrested, Patty reportedly identified herself as Tanya and displayed little emotion. She was charged with multiple crimes, including the Hibernia bank robbery. The government's case against her was bolstered by the surveillance footage and her numerous public declarations of allegiance to the SLA. It was also found that she had even aided in the creation of improvised explosive devices, which were used in 2 separate attacks on police officers. Patty's trial began in January 1976 and was one of the most closely watched cases of the decade. Her defense argued that she had been brainwashed and acted under duress, presenting evidence of the severe abuse she endured during her captivity. They claimed her participation in SLA activities was a survival mechanism rather than a true alignment with the group's ideology. Prosecutors, however, painted a different picture, arguing that Patty had multiple opportunities to escape or seek help, but chose to remain with the SLA and actively engage in their crimes. Despite her defense's arguments, the jury convicted Patty of armed robbery, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. To many, Patty was a victim of a manipulative and abusive cult, while others saw her as a privileged woman who willingly turned to violence. After serving 22 months of her sentence, Patty's prison time was cut short by President Jimmy Carter in 1979, who allowed her to be released on parole. In the years following her release, Patty sought to rebuild her life, marrying her former bodyguard, Bernard Shaw, and raising 2 children. She did her best to remain out of the public eye. To this day, it's still debated whether Patty's crimes resulted from her being brainwashed by the SLA or were more of a genuine transformation of her beliefs. Now, obviously, she didn't choose to be abducted, tortured, and indoctrinated into the SLA's ideology, but at the same time, this situation becomes way more convoluted when you consider that she actually went into a bank with a weapon and was involved in multiple violent incidents where innocent people were actually injured or put in harm's way. In early April 2011, the Dupont de Ligonnès family, living in Nantes, France, became the center of a horrific, soon-to-be infamous murder case. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the patriarch of the family, was suspected of killing his wife, Agnes, and their 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit. The timeline begins around April 3rd or 4th, 2011. It's believed that on these nights, Xavier murdered Agnes and their 3 younger children, Anne, Benoit, and Arthur, in a calculated act. Autopsy reports later revealed that all 4 were shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle, which Xavier had inherited from his father just weeks prior. The children had also been drugged with sleeping pills before they were executed. Agnes was likely killed first, as she showed no traces of drugs in her system. The exact date of their deaths remains disputed due to conflicting witness accounts claiming to have seen Agnes alive. Shortly thereafter, Thomas, the eldest son who was attending college nearby, was lured back home by Xavier, who told him that his mother had been in a serious accident. At some point after his arrival, he was killed in a similar manner to his siblings. After the murders, Xavier went to great lengths to conceal his actions. He purchased bags of quicklime and cement from various stores in Nantes and was seen making multiple trips from the house to his car with large bags. This behavior raised suspicion among neighbors who noticed the unusual activity at the residence. The family's disappearance was first reported by a concerned neighbor named Estelle Chapone on April 11th, when she noticed that the house had been unusually quiet for several days. The windows were shuttered tight, and a note on the door instructed postal workers to return all mail to sender. This prompted police involvement. However, it wasn't until April 19th that they gained access to the home through a locksmith after Chapone's repeated concerns. They found the bodies of Agnes and her 4 children buried beneath the patio in sleeping bags, wrapped in sheets and covered with quicklime, due to its ability to accelerate the breakdown of organic matter and conceal odors emanating from decomposing bodies. Authorities quickly found that each member had been shot multiple times in what investigators described as a methodical execution. According to the autopsies, each of the children were drugged and then shot dead in their sleep. The discovery baffled the communities of Nantes and beyond, as it became clear that a heinous crime had taken place within what appeared to be an idyllic family setting. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the murders, they began focusing on Xavier as the prime suspect, the only member of the family whose body wasn't found buried under the patio. His background revealed financial troubles. He had accrued significant debts and had expressed suicidal thoughts in letters to friends prior to the killings. Witnesses reported seeing him act strangely in the days leading up to the murders, including purchasing supplies that were consistent with preparing for a crime. These included purchasing cement, bullets, cleaning supplies, garbage bags, a spade, other miscellaneous landscaping tools, and a trolley. In March 2011, just prior to the murders, Xavier also purchased a silencer for the .22 caliber rifle he had inherited from his father. This purchase was particularly alarming, given that he had recently begun using the rifle at shooting ranges, despite having no prior interest in firearms. Xavier's whereabouts became a mystery almost immediately after the discovery of his family's bodies. He vanished without a trace following their deaths, abandoning his car near a hotel in southern France shortly after fleeing Nantes. His last known sighting occurred on April 15, 2011, when he was captured on CCTV footage at a French hotel. In the tape, he could be seen leaving the hotel with a large bag, believed to contain his rifle, and withdrawing cash from an ATM. Following this final sighting, Xavier successfully vanished without a trace from the public eye. As news of his disappearance spread, an international arrest warrant was issued for him. In the years following the murders, numerous reported sightings of Xavier have emerged from across Europe and even South America. However, none have been confirmed. Some theorized that he might have taken himself out of guilt or despair over his actions. Others believed he could be living under a newly assumed identity. This case remains one of France's most notorious unsolved mysteries. Nearly all questions raised in the search for Xavier have gone unanswered. We still don't know why he murdered his entire family, where he ran off to, or if he's still alive out in the world somewhere. Shortly after midnight on May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson, a 19-year-old student from Marshall, Minnesota, was driving home after celebrating the end of the spring semester with his friends. He had attended parties in the small towns of both Lind and Canby. While he had been drinking, friends later stated that he did not appear to be overly intoxicated. As he drove along a gravel road, he somehow lost control of his Chevrolet Lumina and ended up in a ditch. Uninjured but unable to free his car, Brandon called his parents around 2 a.m., informing them of his predicament. He believed he was near Lind and asked them to come pick him up. Brandon's parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, immediately set out to find him, staying on the phone with him as they drove. Despite their efforts to locate him by flashing their headlights in the dark, neither party could see the other. After some time, Brandon decided to leave his car and walk toward what he thought were lights in the distance. He asked his father to wait for him at a bar parking lot in Lind. The call between Brandon and his parents lasted for 47 minutes until suddenly, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Brandon exclaimed, "Oh, and the line went dead. His parents attempted to call him back multiple times, but received no response. Hours would pass, and by sunrise, when Brandon had still not returned home, his parents reported him missing to the local police at around 6:30 a.m. Initially, the officers dismissed their concerns, suggesting it was not unusual for young men to stay out late after finishing college classes. Annette recalled an officer telling her that Brandon had the right to be missing if he wanted to be. Kind of a crazy thing to say to a concerned mother who was trying to make sure her son was okay after crashing their car in the middle of the night. After persistent pleading from his parents about the circumstances surrounding Brandon's last known location and the abrupt end of the phone call, police began searching for him. The investigation took a significant turn when authorities obtained Brandon's cell phone records. These records indicated that he had actually been near Taunton, approximately 25 miles northwest of where he believed he was when he made the phone calls to his parents. This new information led search teams to focus on the area around Taunton, and by midday on May 15th, they were finally able to locate Brandon's abandoned car, which they found in a ditch along State Highway 68 near Taunton, with Brandon nowhere to be found. Search efforts intensified as law enforcement and volunteers scoured the surrounding area for any sign of Brandon. Bloodhounds were brought in and successfully picked up his scent near Yellow Medicine River. The dogs followed his trail across an abandoned farm, but lost it at the river's edge, suggesting the possibility that Brandon may have fallen into the water. Despite extensive searches by ground teams and aerial support covering over 122 square miles in various seasons over several years, no trace of Brandon was ever found. As time passed without any leads or evidence regarding his whereabouts, theories began to emerge about what might have happened to him that night. Some speculated that he could have drowned in the river or have been met with foul play. However, authorities found no signs of a struggle at either the accident site or during subsequent searches. The possibility that Brandon staged his own disappearance was also considered, but was ultimately deemed unlikely by both investigators and his family. One of the most widely accepted theories is that Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River. After his car was found, search dogs picked up his scent near the river, suggesting that he may have crossed it while attempting to find help. The temperature that night was just below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is believed that he could have succumbed to hypothermia after getting wet. This theory posits that Brandon may have fallen into the water, managed to climb out, and then wandered away, ultimately losing his life due to exposure. However, despite extensive searches of the river and its surroundings, no remains were ever recovered, which raises questions about this scenario. With the temperature getting close to freezing that night, becoming wet could have potentially been a fatal accident. Bloodhounds tracked his scent a considerable distance away from his car, leading investigators to believe he could have collapsed in one of the nearby fields. A more sinister theory revolves around the possibility of foul play. Some speculate that Brandon may have encountered someone on a nearby farm who harmed him. Variations of this theory speculate that he might have died while on a farmer's property, even if by accident, and that his death was subsequently covered up and his remains hidden. The Bloodhounds did pick up a trace of his scent near a private farm, but the owner refused to allow further searching on their property, which some view as suspicious. While there is no direct evidence supporting foul play, the circumstances surrounding his disappearance leave room for speculation. Others have suggested that after Brandon left his car, he may have encountered someone with malicious intent. This theory posits that he could have been picked up by a driver who initially appeared helpful, but had ulterior motives. There is also the possibility that Brandon may have been struck by a vehicle while walking along the road and on the phone with his parents, leading to his disappearance. The rural area where he was last seen is sparsely populated, making it plausible that a driver could have left the scene without being noticed. However, again, without any direct evidence, each of these theories are merely speculative. The case has remained unsolved for years despite ongoing efforts by law enforcement and volunteers who continue the search. In light of this tragic event and its unresolved nature, Brandon's family advocated for legislative changes regarding how missing persons cases are handled in Minnesota. Their efforts culminated in the passing of Brandon's Law, which mandates that police begin investigations into missing adults promptly rather than delaying based on age or presumed behavior. No definitive evidence has ever surfaced to explain what happened on that night in May of 2008. In the bustling metropolis of London, a city teeming with over 8 million souls, one woman's tragic fate went unnoticed for an astonishing 2.5 years. The haunting story of Joyce Carol Vincent makes clear the isolation that can exist even in the heart of a crowded city. Joyce Vincent was born on October 19, 1965, in London's Hammersmith district. She was the youngest of 5 sisters born to immigrant parents from Grenada. Tragedy struck early in Joyce's life when her mother passed away when she was just 11 years old. This loss would have a profound impact on her future relationships and sense of belonging. At 16, Joyce stepped away from her education without any qualifications, but was still able to find a successful career. In 1985, at the age of 20, Joyce began her professional life as a secretary at Overseas Containers Limited in London, before eventually landing a position at the prestigious accounting firm Ernst & Young. Despite her lack of formal education, Joyce was described by those who knew her as intelligent, beautiful, and charismatic. She had a wide circle of friends in the music industry and even rubbed shoulders with celebrities. In April of 1990, at the age of 24, Joyce attended a concert at Wembley Stadium where she reportedly met Nelson Mandela himself and shook his hand. All of this is to say that Joyce appeared to be a fine, well-connected, sociable young woman who appeared to be on the path to success. Despite this image, beneath the surface, Joyce's life was far more complex. She had a strained relationship with her emotionally distant father, and at one point she even claimed he had died in 2001, when in reality he was alive at the time and would end up passing away later in 2004. This lie about her father's death was just one of many mysteries surrounding Joyce's life. In March of 2001, Joyce abruptly resigned from her position at Ernst & Young, the reasons for which remain unclear, with conflicting stories floating among her colleagues. Some claimed she said she was traveling with a group of 20 people, while others believed she had been headhunted for another job. The truth, however, was far more troubling. Following her resignation, Joyce's life took a dark turn. She spent time in a domestic abuse shelter in Haringey and worked as a cleaner in a budget hotel. During this period, she became increasingly estranged from her family and friends. A source involved in the investigation later revealed, quote, "She detached herself from her family, but there was no bust-up. They are a really nice family. We understand she was in a relationship and there was a history of domestic violence." Although the identity of her abuser is not explicitly confirmed, it is speculated that it was an abusive boyfriend who influenced her decision to distance herself from friends and family. This relationship history aligns with the accounts of those who knew her, who mentioned Joyce's tendency to gravitate towards possessive and controlling individuals. Despite efforts to uncover more details about her life, the specifics of her abuser remain largely unknown. In February 2003, Joyce was moved into a bedsit flat above Wood Green Shopping City in North London. The flat was owned by the Metropolitan Housing Trust and was used to house victims of abuse. This would be Joyce's final home, though no one could have predicted the tragic events that would unfold within its walls. In November 2003, just weeks before her presumed death, she was hospitalized at North Middlesex Hospital for 2 days due to a peptic ulcer, or a lesion in the lining of the digestive tract. She had been vomiting blood, indicative of the serious health issues she was facing. It was sometime in December 2003, at the age of 38, that Joyce Vincent is believed to have died in her bedsit flat. The exact date and cause of her death remain unknown. Some speculate that she may have succumbed to an asthma attack or complications from her peptic ulcer. What is certain is that Joyce died alone, with no one to witness her passing or mourn her immediate absence. At this point in her life, Joyce was desperately isolated, seemingly by deliberate choice. Despite having a wide circle of acquaintances, including former colleagues and romantic partners, Joyce had gradually distanced herself from nearly everyone she knew. Her decision to cut ties with family and friends seems to have been influenced by a combination of shame, fear, and perhaps a desire to protect herself from further harm. Many of those who knew her described her as beautiful, popular, and someone who left a lasting impression on those she met. However, despite these fond memories, none of them actively sought her out when she disappeared from their lives. Some friends assumed she had simply moved on or was busy with new pursuits. Others may have felt that reaching out was unnecessary or unwelcome, especially if Joyce had intentionally distanced herself. The estrangement from her family was also likely exacerbated by her experiences with domestic violence and her subsequent efforts to maintain privacy and safety. It seems that none of Joyce Vincent's friends or family members even knew about her final address. She didn't inform anyone about her move to the flat in Wood Green, London. Joyce's sisters had actually even hired a private detective to try and locate her, but they only managed to find one of her previous addresses. These factors created a situation where Joyce could vanish without immediate concern from those who once knew her well, And that's exactly what happened when she passed away in her apartment. As her body lay undiscovered in the flat, the days began to pass without anyone noticing that she had died. A team from the North London Housing Association, prompted by over £2,400 in unpaid rent, forced entry into the flat. The coroner was unable to determine an exact cause of death due to the condition of the remains, but foul play was ruled out after a criminal investigation. The discovery of Joyce Vincent's body raised numerous questions and sparked a national conversation about isolation in modern society. Filmmaker Carol Morley was so intrigued by Joyce's story that she decided to make a documentary titled Dreams of a Life. Morley spent years tracking down people who had known Joyce, including ex-boyfriends and former colleagues, in an attempt to piece together the puzzle of her life and death. Through Morley's investigation, a complex picture of Joyce emerged. She was described as someone who frequently changed jobs and moved from one flat to another across London. She was known to cut off contact with people abruptly, including her own sisters. This pattern of behavior contributed to the lack of concern when she suddenly disappeared from people's lives. Martin Lister, who had dated Joyce for 3 years and kept in sporadic contact with her until 2002, was shocked to learn of her death through Morley's documentary. He described Joyce as a hard worker who had held great jobs, making it all the more surprising that she had ended up in public housing. Despite living in one of the world's most populous cities, surrounded by millions of people, Joyce slipped through the cracks of society without anyone noticing her absence. This case loudly speaks to the isolation of modern life. I personally experienced this in New York City when I was there for 2 years, and I really didn't know anybody there. I had a couple acquaintances and I made some friends later on, but for like the first year, I really didn't know anybody, and a lot of times I would wonder what would happen if I just died in my apartment in the middle of the night. How long would it take for somebody to finally get in there and realize what happened? I understand that that's a very morbid thought, but I think that a lot of us have pondered that question before, especially when we go through these sort of isolated bouts in our lives. Personally, after I moved back home and talked to a therapist and met with my doctor, I did feel miles better. I was really struggling with isolation, and this one just kind of hit home for me a little bit. So if you feel the same way, I definitely encourage you to reach out to a therapist or a doctor and see how they can help. Regardless, in the end, Joyce Vincent's case is one of isolation, sadness, and a lack of human connection. Her life and death prompt us to ask difficult questions about how we interact with others and care for each other in an increasingly fragmented world.